How could this happen to Mom? I had returned to my childhood home after years of absence, carrying with me memories both warm and bittersweet, only to be greeted by a sight that would forever scar my soul. My mother's skeletal remains, buried in the garden she had lovingly tended for decades. The police, with their clinical detachment, confirmed what my mind refused to accept. She had been dead for over a month. And yet, how could this be possible when I had been exchanging emails with her just the day before? My hands trembled as I fumbled through the confusion, seeking answers, and that's when I stumbled upon her diary. The pages were worn but resolute, and as I read, fear and fury coursed through me in equal measure, leaving me shaking with disbelief. The story she had left behind was one of devotion, struggle, and betrayal. A story I had only glimpsed through photographs of my father, who had died in an accident when I was just a year old. A father I had never truly known beyond the sepia-toned images Mom kept on the shelf. Mom had been my anchor, my unwavering support. A woman who bore the weight of a single-parent household with grace, tirelessly working to put me through college, all the while never complaining about the sacrifices she made. She was reserved but strong, kind but steadfast, the very essence of resilience. My husband Pete understood this. He had always treated her with respect, aware of the pivotal role she had played in shaping the person I had become. We had married when I was 26, after meeting in college, and settled about a 2-hour drive from my childhood home. Despite the distance, our bond with Mom remained close, though her health began to falter after decades of relentless work. I urged her to come live with us, hoping to ease both our minds, but she politely declined, her gentle refusal tinged with the understanding that living alone was what gave her comfort. To bridge the distance, we began communicating almost daily. Mom struggled with technology, unable to navigate emails with ease, but we persevered, finding solace in the sound of her voice over the phone each day. Those conversations became a ritual, a comforting anchor in my otherwise hectic life. And though I could only visit her once a month due to work, Pete offered to step in whenever I couldn't. "If you can't make it, I'll check on her." "Don't worry," he would say. And I thanked him, knowing that his kindness was genuine, even if his financial habits sometimes made my stomach knot with anxiety. Money had always been a point of tension between us. Pete's generosity extended beyond reason, often leaving us in precarious situations, and despite my repeated attempts to curb his spending, his habits persisted. The first shock came when I opened a credit card statement, over $11,000 spent in a single month. Pete's excuse, a night out with friends, felt thin and inadequate, and in my anger, I lost my temper. His apology was immediate, heartfelt, and seemingly sincere, and I decided to forgive him, hoping that lesson would be enough. But less than a month later, the cycle repeated. This time, he raided our joint savings without my knowledge, claiming desperate need. The betrayal cut deeper than the first, and I warned him with a clarity sharpened by frustration. If this continued, I would leave. From that moment, Pete's demeanor shifted. He became attentive, consulting me for even minor purchases, helping with housework and caring for my mother in ways he had not before. For a while, it seemed peace had been restored, though unease lingered beneath the surface, like a storm waiting to break. 4 years into our marriage, a peculiar shift began. Emails from Mom. She had never been proficient with technology, yet now the messages arrived quickly, almost too efficiently, raising my suspicions. Concern gnawed at me. My work was overwhelming, and though I could not visit immediately, Pete volunteered to check on her. When he returned, he reported that she seemed weak but not in immediate danger, offering me temporary reassurance. Still, a nagging feeling persisted. Something about the sudden fluency with emails felt unnatural. Weeks passed, the summer heat giving way to the crisp hints of autumn, and finally, a rare afternoon off allowed me to visit Mom in person. I intended to surprise her, to feel her presence again, to see her face and hear her laugh. The house greeted me with silence, dust settling like a blanket over memories long undisturbed. Using my spare key, I entered cautiously, the quiet only amplifying my unease. The garden, once vibrant and orderly, showed signs of disturbance. Curiosity pushed me forward, and as I dug through the soil in the area that seemed most tampered with, my hand struck something hard. A scream tore from my throat before I could stop it. I had unearthed her skeleton. Buried alongside her was the necklace I had given her for Mother's Day, a token of love now entwined with horror. My mind refused to process the reality, each heartbeat pounding with disbelief and terror. I called the police immediately, the trembling in my voice betraying the calm I tried to summon. While waiting, I studied the remains, the finality of the scene pressing down like a lead weight on my chest. Pete arrived shortly thereafter, and both of us were questioned. The timeline I had trusted, the daily emails, the consistent conversations, did not align with the grim facts. Mom had been dead for over a month. Her cell phone was missing, vanished from the world, yet someone had kept up the correspondence, fooling me, delaying discovery. I was paralyzed with grief and confusion, unable to reconcile the loving voice I had heard with the reality now laid bare before me. In the days that followed, Pete handled the funeral arrangements with a competence that felt almost rehearsed while I wandered through a haze of disbelief, unable to comprehend the depth of betrayal hidden in the ordinary details of our lives. Returning to the house to begin sorting through her belongings, I discovered a letter-sized box tucked away, full of artifacts from my childhood, drawings, letters, gifts I had made for Mom. Each item spoke of her love, her careful preservation of our shared memories. Yet beneath this layer of nostalgia lay a new discovery, her diary, recent and meticulously kept. Hesitation seized me as I opened it, fearing the truths it might contain, yet an irrepressible need for understanding pushed me forward. What I read transformed my confusion into rage, revealing the harrowing reality of what had transpired behind the facade of domestic normalcy, a truth that would ignite in me a resolve I had never known before, a determination to confront the darkness that had touched my family. The days after discovering Mom's diary were a haze of sleepless nights and restless wandering through her house, each corner echoing with memories and questions that clawed at my mind relentlessly. I found myself retracing every phone call, every email, every casual interaction, wondering where the invisible line had crossed into horror. It was there, amid the quiet shadows of the rooms she had once animated with her warmth, that I began to truly grasp the depth of the deception that had been woven around me. Mom had always been private about her struggles, always determined to shield me from worry, yet now her own words, carefully recorded in that fragile notebook, laid bare a reality I could barely face. She had been ill, seriously ill, a truth hidden from me, until I stumbled upon the medical documents tucked away among her papers. A diagnosis that should have demanded attention, treatment, and care had been abandoned, stopped midway, as if the simple act of seeking help had become impossible under some unseen pressure. My heart tightened as I considered the sacrifices she must have made, the silent endurance she bore in her final days, and a shiver of dread ran through me as the pieces began to fit together. The emails I had received, cheerful, considerate, timely, were no longer just comforting. They were a mask, a carefully constructed illusion, a cruel charade maintained to shield me from a reality that was far more sinister than I could have imagined. It was Pete, of course. The realization was slow at first, an uncomfortable suspicion that twisted itself through every interaction I had shared with him in the past months and years. His sudden attentiveness to Mom, his insistence on checking in, even the meticulous attention he seemed to give to her comfort and well-being, were no longer gestures of genuine care. They were part of a calculated strategy, a means to an end. He had a way of appearing devoted, of presenting himself as considerate and reliable, while simultaneously maneuvering behind the scenes with a cunning I had not wanted to see in the man I had married. At first, it was only the financial discrepancies that gnawed at me. The way he spent without thought, ignoring our agreed-upon allowances, using our joint savings without consultation, it had always frustrated me. Yet I had attempted to rationalize it, to forgive him, to believe that he could change. But now, in the light of the diary and the uncovered documents, the pattern became horrifyingly clear. Pete had been exploiting my mother, pressuring her for money under the guise of friendship and familial concern, manipulating her love for me into a tool to satisfy his debts and reckless spending. The anger that surged through me was a hot, searing thing. 1 part grief and 2 parts disbelief, each beat of my heart pounding with the betrayal I had failed to perceive until the evidence was undeniable. The diary itself was painstaking in detail, a chronicle of fear, coercion, and quiet resistance. Mom had written of arguments, of Pete's growing impatience, of the way he would insist, plead, and finally threaten, turning her concern for her own health into leverage for his demands. She had been forced to choose, repeatedly, between her treatments, life-saving procedures she could not afford to forego without consequence, and the needs of the man she believed should love and support me without exploitation. I read of the tension in her voice, captured in her careful annotations, the way she described the internal conflict between protecting me and confronting Pete, of the humiliation and terror she endured as he browbeat her for sums of money she had saved for her own survival. The juxtaposition of her gentle, steadfast love for me with the cruelty inflicted upon her by the very man who had vowed to be my partner struck a deep, icy chord in my chest. I could feel the weight of her suffering as though it were my own, and every line I read twisted my grief into righteous fury. This was no longer merely about loss or shock. This was about the violation of trust, the desecration of family, and the betrayal of the bond that should have been sacred. As I pieced together the timeline, another unsettling truth emerged. The emails, those daily, seemingly innocent missives, were written not by Mom, but by Pete himself. He had crafted them with meticulous care, ensuring that I felt reassured, that I believed our conversations continued uninterrupted, that the illusion of her presence lulled me into a false sense of security. Each message, each phrase had been calculated to deceive me, to manipulate my schedule and my expectations, to give him freedom to act while keeping me blind to the horrific reality. My mind raced as I considered the audacity, the sheer premeditation required to maintain such a facade for weeks, even months, convincing me that Mom was alive while she lay helpless, her body succumbing to the consequences of his violence and greed. I could see it now, the way he had used my love and my concern as a shield, the way he had exploited my absence and workload to further his own ends, and the chilling efficiency with which he had removed any trace of her cell phone, any possibility that the truth could reach me before it was too late. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could, a corruption of trust that left me feeling exposed and violated in a space I had always believed safe. The diary revealed more than just financial exploitation. It hinted at the moments of terror, the fear that must have gripped my mother as she tried to resist, as she attempted to negotiate her survival against the mounting pressures Pete imposed. She had written of threats, subtle at first, escalating in intensity as he became more desperate, more insistent, until the final confrontation that would seal her fate. There was a sense of inevitability in her words, a recognition that despite her careful attempts to protect both herself and me, the situation had become uncontrollable, a force beyond her ability to counteract. Reading her fear, imagining the scene she had described, I felt my stomach knot and my hands clench involuntarily. The thought that my own mother, the woman who had nurtured and protected me from the world's cruelties, had faced this alone, forced to endure threats and ultimatums at the hands of a man I had trusted, filled me with a mixture of grief so profound it was almost physical, and rage so intense it left me trembling. And yet, within the same pages, I also found traces of her ingenuity, her foresight, the small acts of defiance that marked her determination not to be entirely powerless. Mom had purchased a small camera and arranged for its installation in her living room, the notes in her diary hinting at her hope that through this device, the truth might someday reach me. She had not known when the final act would occur, nor had she anticipated the full scale of Pete's cruelty, but she had sought to arm me with evidence, to give me a path toward justice even as she faced her mortality. The knowledge of this courage, her quiet, determined plan to preserve the truth, sent a chill down my spine and ignited a burning resolve within me. I would not allow her efforts to be in vain. Every stolen dollar, every threat, every cruel manipulation Pete had inflicted upon her, I would confront. Every deceit woven into the fabric of our lives, every lie that had allowed him to masquerade as a loving husband while committing atrocities behind closed doors, would be brought to light. My reflection on all of this left me exhausted but resolute, the grief and anger coalescing into a singular purpose. I began to plan, not recklessly, not in the heat of immediate emotion, but with the meticulousness my mother herself had shown in her final attempts to ensure I could act. I needed to confront Pete directly, to expose him, to take the evidence she had left me and use it to dismantle the carefully constructed facade he had maintained. The emails, the diary, the hidden camera, each piece was a thread, and now I held the weave of the truth in my hands. I could feel the tension tightening in my chest as I imagined the confrontation, the words that would need to be spoken, the evidence that would demand acknowledgement. The thought of seeing him, of watching him react when faced with undeniable proof of his crimes, sent a shiver of anticipation through me, a mixture of dread and grim satisfaction. And yet, even as I prepared for this reckoning, the shadow of loss loomed. Mom's absence was palpable, a hollow ache that no act of justice could entirely fill. I wandered through her home, touching the objects she had cherished, feeling the echoes of her voice in the quiet, imagining the life she might have had, the treatments she might have received, the peace she deserved. The juxtaposition of her gentle presence and the violence inflicted upon her was unbearable, yet it also steeled my resolve. She had faced her final days with courage, had left me the means to act, and I could not betray that trust by hesitating. The diary, her words, the evidence she had preserved, they were my inheritance now, and I would wield them with the precision and care she had imagined, not for vengeance alone, but to ensure the truth was revealed, the perpetrator brought to justice, and her memory honored in the only way left to me, through the unflinching exposure of the man who had wronged her so deeply. The day I decided to confront Pete arrived with a weight that pressed upon me like the relentless heat of summer, the clarity of purpose sharpening my mind even as my heart quivered with grief and anger. We had arranged to spend a day off together, a rare interlude from work, though the ordinary pretense of a casual outing was now charged with an intensity he could not have anticipated. As we strolled through quiet streets toward a nearby cafe, the sunlight glinting off shop windows and the distant hum of the city surrounding us, I felt the tension in my chest tighten, each step bringing me closer to a confrontation that had been building for months, for years even, though its roots traced back to the first subtle signs of his duplicity. We entered the cafe, a modest space with soft lighting, the murmur of conversation from businessmen and middle-aged women, filling the air like a soft backdrop to the storm I was about to unleash. Pete, unaware of the storm that awaited him, chose a window seat, his eyes glinting with a casual delight, as if the world outside were still the one he could control, as if our lives had not already been shattered by his reckless greed and escalating violence. I sat across from him, my hand resting lightly on the table, the diary and documents concealed in my bag but thrumming with the power of revelation. "I have something I want to talk about," I said, my voice steady despite the tempest raging within. He looked at me curiously, his brow furrowing, the casual confidence that had allowed him to manipulate and intimidate for so long, momentarily faltering. "What is it?" "What's wrong?" he asked, the concern in his tone a fragile veneer, one that could not hide the tension I sensed beneath it. I took a deep breath, drawing on the memory of my mother's courage and foresight, and leaned forward slightly. "I've been wondering about something regarding my mother. How is it possible that I was emailing her the day before she was found, when according to the police she had been dead for over a month?" The question hung in the air like a dagger, invisible yet sharply felt, and I watched his eyes flicker, the first crack in the armor he had so meticulously worn. His initial response was a feigned theory, an attempt to rationalize the impossible. Perhaps someone else had been impersonating my mother, pretending to be her to delay the discovery. His voice was calm, even measured, but his eyes betrayed the first glimmer of panic. I let him speak, listening to his theory with a careful neutrality, though my mind was already racing, connecting the dots, assembling the puzzle he had so desperately tried to obscure. Then I brought out the documents, the medical diagnosis he had never known about, revealing the illness that had plagued my mother, the treatments she had abandoned, the sacrifices she had made to protect me, even as he manipulated her for his own ends. "Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice cold and precise, each word weighted with the authority of undeniable truth. "No, I didn't," he replied, his shoulders tightening, the first clear sign of the fear I had anticipated. It was not just fear of exposure. It was the primal realization that the web he had spun with arrogance and selfishness was unraveling. I pressed on, my tone unyielding, methodically revealing the evidence of his financial manipulation. "You borrowed money from my mother, didn't you?" The words landed like a strike, each syllable echoing through the cafe as Pete's calm veneer finally fractured. His initial denial, vehement and defensive, quickly gave way to a visible panic, his body stiffening, his face pale as the reality I laid before him could no longer be ignored. He slammed the table, his voice rising, attempting to reclaim control through aggression. But the surrounding patrons recoiled, the ordinary sounds of the cafe replaced by the tension radiating from our table. I did not waver. I had learned the necessity of composure from my mother herself, who had faced her own torment with quiet determination. I placed the diary on the table, opening it to the pages that chronicled his threats, his escalating demands, the coercion that had forced her to choose between her health and my well-being. I read aloud the passages, each word a hammer striking against the facade he had maintained for so long. The effect was immediate. Pete's smirk vanished, replaced by disbelief, then anger, and finally an unsteady realization that his actions were now exposed in ways he could not dismiss. He leaned back, attempting to deflect, to dismiss the diary as the imaginings of an old woman, yet the weight of the words, coupled with the meticulously preserved notes of her observations, rendered his arguments hollow. I then revealed the hidden camera footage, the final piece of the puzzle my mother had so cunningly left behind. The screen on my smartphone displayed the undeniable evidence: the confrontation, his loss of temper, the strike that ended my mother's life, his panic as he moved her body into the garden, the theft of her money and cell phone, and the empty living room that followed. Every detail, every motion, every decision caught on film, immutable and damning. I watched as his face drained of color, his defenses crumbling, his arrogance replaced by the raw, naked exposure of guilt. His attempts to justify, to diminish the act were futile. He spoke of debts, of necessity, of accidents, but each excuse rang hollow against the weight of incontrovertible proof. The diary, the camera, the preserved evidence of his manipulation all converged to strip him of pretense. He raged, he screamed, he attempted to assert control, but the truth was an unrelenting force, one he could neither charm, intimidate, nor evade. In that moment, I felt the culmination of years of grief, betrayal, and helplessness transform into a resolute, icy determination. I would not allow him to manipulate the narrative, to escape accountability, or to further harm the memory of the woman who had sacrificed everything for me. His pleading, his threats, his attempts to frame the events as accidental, all were meaningless in the face of what my mother had ensured I possessed: the irrefutable story of his actions, the silent witness of her foresight. As the sirens approached, called by attentive cafe staff who had observed the confrontation, I felt a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. Pete's final attempts at manipulation failed utterly. He was restrained, handcuffed, and led away while I remained seated, a storm of emotions swirling within me. Grief, anger, and a sobering sense of justice coalesced, tempered by the knowledge that the path forward would demand both resilience and courage. Our divorce was finalized shortly thereafter, the legal proceedings a formality compared to the emotional reckoning that had already occurred. Through the lawyer, I claimed damages, a necessary step to restore some sense of balance to the life that had been upended by his selfishness and violence. Pete's arrest cemented the closure, the system now acknowledging what my mother had known and tried to preserve: the gravity of his crimes, the reality of his betrayal, the irreversible harm inflicted. Walking beneath the clear sky in the days that followed, I felt an almost surreal weight lifting. The pain of loss remained, raw and persistent, yet it was now framed by a hard-earned sense of purpose and resolve. I thought of my mother, of her courage, her foresight, the small acts of resistance that had allowed me to bring him to justice, and I felt the quiet strength she had always inspired in me. I vowed to live in a way that honored her memory, to carry forward the lessons of integrity, vigilance, and compassion she had instilled. The betrayal and violence, though deeply scarring, had not vanquished the essence of what she had fought to protect: the truth, the bond between mother and daughter, and the moral clarity that allowed justice to prevail. In those quiet moments as the world moved on around me, I finally allowed myself to grieve openly, to shed tears for the mother I had lost, the innocence that had been stolen, and the life that might have been. And yet, even amid sorrow, there was clarity. I had confronted the darkness, held it to the light, and emerged with the knowledge that I could protect her legacy, reveal the truth, and ensure that those who harmed her would face the consequences. Looking up at the endless expanse of sky, I whispered a vow, a promise to live in a way that would never shame her, that would honor the love, courage, and sacrifices she had made, and that would transform my grief into purposeful action, forever guided by the enduring presence of her spirit. The storm had passed, but its lessons would remain with me, shaping the path forward with the clarity, strength, and moral courage my mother had instilled in me from the very beginning.